Welcome, everybody, to the Steve Cimino Says Boom Show. We're at issue number 37. Ooh, we're coming. And Steve, 37 and 37 what?
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
"37 boom, 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 booms right now, right, Steve? Now.
That's right.
I love it. I love it. And it's a special day. But now we got to tell people at the Pop XP what they need to know because me and Steve don't have a clue. We don't have a clue. We never do.
Well, let me educate you. Everyone, take a look down below. You're going to see that subscribe button. Make sure to click that. And besides that, there's a bell. Make sure you smash that so you get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new episodes like tonight's where we're having a great guest. So, gentlemen, take it away.
Oh, God, a great guest. Mr. Houston, we have a guest that you've been salivating for. And just before we go into him, he was our first guest that we ever had. So, Steve, what can you tell the folks at home who's coming on, what's going on, and why is he so important?
You know, sometimes I just have to pinch myself to realize that I'm going to be speaking with someone that I thought that I would never, ever, ever, ever be able to speak to. And of course, we're talking about one of the legends of all time at Marvel, Mr. Steve Englehart. And anyone who knows me, anyone who's watched any of my sales over at Torpedo or anything else, you know that his name, Roy Thomas and Steve Gerber and Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, they come up all the time. Now, the beauty of it is, of course, we don't have the ability to speak with Mr. Steve Gerber, but we can really get into the weeds with Mr. Englehart. And this is our second visit with Mr. Englehart. We really went into his early career on our first show. And on this show, we are going to showcase some stuff that some of you may not know about.
Ooh. Yeah, and Steve, that's true. I was going to say it, but you took it out of my mouth. Something about Roy Thomas, Steve Gerber, and Steve Englehart gets Steve all squishy, squashy. He gets crazy. We got to put the bib on him, but we brought him back. Our first actual guest on the show, and always a tremendous guy, Mr. Star-Lord himself. Bring him out, Niall, the Mr. Steve Englehart.
Welcome.
There he is. How you doing, guys?
Look at him, looking good and looking healthy. How you doing today, Mr. Englehart? It's a pleasure, always a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Okay, we always go, when you were here last time, we get into the topics, but I'm going to have to let Steve go because Steve has so much to say. The continuity, we know the history. Steve, the editorial, it's all there. Steve, Mr. Houston, get to Mr. Star-Lord and tell us what we need to know because we're just going to listen to you two talk.
Okay. Well, again, a pleasure, Steve. I can't tell you how long I have been waiting. Our first time we spoke, we went into your early career, your first steps into the industry. So I wanted to get started with a rather, I don't know whether it could be controversial or something. You leave Marvel in early 1976, and You leave Marvel after an astounding, successful run of books. Now, I don't know what the sales tallies were. Maybe you had the second best. I don't know whether you were outselling Amazing Spider-Man, but I swear that your era over at Marvel had been incredible. And suddenly, around about March 1976, you're gone from Marvel. Can you give us some background into how that could happen?
Well, when I started at Marvel, Stan was still in charge. Very quickly, Roy took over. But after a couple of years, Roy didn't want to do it anymore. So then either Len or Marv became the editor, and then Marv or Len became the editor, and then I forget the order they did it in. But Archie Goodwin was the editor, and then they got to another guy. And I hesitate to even bring up the name, but I mean, there'd been a lot of turmoil. And, you know, the new guy had said that he wanted to write Avengers and Defenders. And I know well, whatever, that's neither here nor there. But in any event, he called up Steve Gerber and he called up me and he said, well, I'm just taking the Defenders and the Avengers because I'm the editor and I want to do them. And I didn't think that sounded much like the Marvel that I had, idolized and then joined. Right. So I said, well, if you take the Avengers, then I'm out of here. And he did. And so I left, and I wasn't. So I thought I was, Marvel was all I had done to that point. And I thought I would at least be taking a break from comics. And so my wife and I decided to go to Europe and travel around for most of a year, which we eventually did. But after having set all that up, Jeanette Kahn called and asked me to come work for her at DC. And I said, I can give you until I leave the country. And she said, okay. So that's the full story of that transition. I wasn't planning to go to work for DC, wasn't expecting to go to work for DC.
Okay. Again, in a way, it's very sad. But again, you go over to DC and amongst all of the legendary Batman stories and I mean, people to this day, they have their favorites, and I've seen people lose their minds when I bring these books up. You turn over at DC, we've already had 50 years of Batman stories, and I'm thinking, well, what more can they add? You come along and you give us the Joker fish with Marshall Rogers, and it is just extraordinary. Can you give me or give us some background as to, when you were sitting down there and thinking, okay, all right, suddenly I'm writing Batman here. Was there any weight upon you, or was it just like, just another job, I'm going to get this done?
I would say both. By that time, I was a professional writer, and I kind of knew what I could do and couldn't do. So I don't think that I felt like, oh, now the Batman, and also what Batman was not as ubiquitous as he is now. I mean, it was the Batman, but it was in sort of more scaled to the regular scale of comics as opposed to a big thing in and of itself. But I Batman, probably my earliest commercial superhero character. When I was a kid reading them, I probably said before, I was reading stuff in the 50s. And so there was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. Batman was easily my favorite, So I was excited to write. Well, I mean, again, Jeanette called and asked me to come over, and she wanted me to do the Justice League. Specifically, she said, I want you to do what you did with the Avengers for the Justice League. And that's a separate story, actually, about what I did with the Justice League. But I said, I could write the Justice League. That'd be all right. But I do want to write the Batman. That would be my price. I want to write the Batman in and of himself. And she said, okay. she had tried to hire John Buscema as well as me at that point, and stand outbidder for Buscema. I had already quit, so there was no bidding going on for me. But I mean, she was trying to, ramp up a fairly moribund company, and I don't know who told her, because she didn't come from comics; she came from kids magazines. But somebody said, "Get that guy." So, or those guys, So she tried. Anyway, I mean, she asked me to write Justice League, and I said, yeah, and then I'll do Batman too. And I say now, I mean, I had a good time doing all that. The way that DC treated me for doing that, I was put a sour taste on it ever since. But I mean, I didn't feel a lot of pressure writing the Batman, but I felt like, here's my chance to write the Batman that I think of, would like to see, So that's what I did.
Yeah, Steve, I just want to get the timeline correct. Now, you wrote Batman after you left Marvel, but how come, do you have a couple of detective comics that you wrote prior to that, like earlier on?
Because one I wrote, my roommate at the time was Sal Amendola, who was a really nice guy and a good artist. He drifted out of comics, so I don't really know what the deal was. But he and his brother, Sal's brother, and Neil Adams had gotten together and worked out this Batman story. Sal drew it, and I guess Neil and his brother contributed, whatever. But then they came to me and they said, would you dialogue this, So I took their story and dialogued it. And so my name's on that book, and I did my professional best, but it's not, I didn't create that story. Right. So I had done that, but that was like a favor for a friend. I mean, I wasn't working for DC or anything.
Okay. And was that Detective Comics 439, that story?
Probably Night of the Hunter, I think, something like that, where Batman never
Yes.
speaks.
Now hold on. That is considered one of the, now he's talking about the Joker fish. That story was basically what Michael Uslan had Tim Burton read before he was starting Batman 1989.
Right.
He thinks that is the greatest story, and it is always ranked there as one of the within that top 5 greatest Batman stories ever written. So, I mean, it's just so funny you talking about it like it's just, I just but I mean, like, that issue is crazy.
But I did just dialogue it, and in fact, I dialogued it too much. I mean, it was explained to me when I got it that the Batman never speaks. And yet I wrote a little dialogue for Batman, and it was Archie Goodwin, the editor, who took it out again, saved me from myself. But again, it was all their doing. I put the words together, but I just,
But holy moly, I mean, if you think about it, that was your first Batman story. I mean, like, and it never went away. Like, it just, like, that thing is always there.
Well, I mean, it's again, I've discussed before how surreal it is that some of this stuff has never gone away.
Oh, I recommend anybody
and people, people still.
Yeah, I recommend to anybody out there, if you needed to read a Batman story, if you got to read Detective Comics 439. Michael Uslan, in his book, he produced every Batman movie since 1989, says it's the greatest story ever, and I had to read it because of that. Because obviously I didn't really read a lot of the DCs then, but it was incredible. And I read it today just before you were coming on. I was like, God damn, this is so good. So let me just say, you always wanted to write Batman. You wrote one of the greatest ever. Detective Comics 439. Oh, okay, Steve, go ahead. Oh my God.
Well, I remember 2 of the best ever. You got the Joker fish. The Joker fish is. You can talk to 1 million Batman fans. Okay, you bring that cover out, they have tears coming down their face.
It's a great cover.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work. But I want to get more into the weeds when it comes to you having to handle that Justice League, because, you know, you got to a point where you had written such incredible continuity-rich Avengers stories. I mean, you had gone into every facet, every corner of the Marvel universe. It was like godlike swipes. It's like I know everything, and I can weave it together. Suddenly, you're over at DC. Jeanette Kahn's like, "Hey, I want you to do Justice League." Did you quickly have to like bone up on some issues? Did you read like a couple of maybe a year or two back to find out who, what, why, or where?
No. Before I got into comics, I was a complete comic fan, and I read everything by everybody. I've said before, I read the romance books, I read the Western books, I read Charlton, I read Gold Key. I mean, I read everybody, including Justice League, of course, and all that. So when asked to do something like that, basically know who the characters have been, at least. I mean, she wanted me to change them, to give them personalities and so forth. So, I mean, what I had to do there was go back. I did go back and reread, you know, sections of the Justice League to that point, looking for, okay, if I'm going to give the Atom a personality, let me think about the Atom here. Let me look at the Atom. And all of them, right? Aquaman and so forth. So I had to, like, you know, the common statement then was that they weren't characters, they were just statues, right? I mean, they were just avatars wearing the costumes. Yeah. That was about as far as DC had gotten in many ways. So I was supposed to give them personalities and have them interact the way the Avengers did and all that kind of stuff. And that led to my saying, I need to do a double-sized book monthly. I can't give you depth on every one of the Justice League people and tell a story in a regular-sized book. And Jeanette was down with that, and fortunately Dick Dillon, who was the artist on it, was old school enough. I mean, it was just like, okay, now I'll draw the equivalent of 2 books a month here rather than 1 book a month, but I can do that because I'm old school, right? And I loved having Dick Dillon on the book because he was, you know, he was the link to the Justice League. I mean, you know, you could have gone to Mike Sikowski, I suppose, I mean, you know, along the way, but so I thought it was very cool to be doing the Justice League with Dick Dillon and having that space in a later era, in like 2001, after Marvel had bought Malibu, and before they figured out contractual things that made them freak out, they were going to bring the Malibu universe into the Marvel universe, and they asked me to do that.
Right.
And I said the same thing. I said, if I'm going to have to bring in all these characters that the Marvel universe doesn't know yet and give them personalities, show their personalities, because they had them coming out of Malibu. But I mean, introducing characters and telling a story and doing all that, I'm going to need a double-sized book. And Marvel said no. They said, very succinctly, they said anybody who could draw 34 pages a month is not a fan favorite. And any fan favorite won't draw 34 pages a month. So Dick Dillon, you know, no. Then there were other reasons why that never happened, the Malibu thing. But I'm just saying that with the Justice League, I did get to do the double-sized book, and it really was nice because then I was able to like spend time with each of these characters and still have a plot that, you know, that tied everything together. And I knew, again, I'd already made arrangements to go travel at a certain point, so I knew that I could only do this many issues of Justice League or Batman or whatever. So sort of from the start, unusually for me, but I mean, I could sort of say, okay, I got to tell the story of my run here, and my run is only going to be this long. so I can sort of envision the arcs that'll have to take place, you know, to get to have it all wrap up at a certain time. So that, you know, there were a number of differences. I mean, working for DC, but the biggest thing that that turned out to be exactly right was getting the double-sized space for the Justice League. And then, then it's like, okay, everybody except Batman, I'm just writing here as part of a group, so it's like, but each one of them needs to be distinct. Each one of them needs to have something going on. So, she got me to do that for DC, and then it turns out DC doesn't, whatever. Anyway, I did it. Not always happy that I did it in retrospect.
So you
right, but go ahead.
Justice League, and then you take a break from comics, if I'm correct. There's this little gap, and I'm sure that a lot of the people who are watching this show are going to be like, well, what were you doing for all those years outside of comics? How were you making a wage? What were you doing?
I did a couple of things. I was a Marvel zombie in some respects, even though I was working for Marvel. And so the whole thing about quitting Marvel because they weren't playing by the rules that had been in place before, that hurt. In that, I mean, not like, oh God, but just like, I said, I'm not going to do any comics here for a while. I think I actually said I won't ever do them again, but that's the difference.
Wow.
So I wrote a novel, having traveled. Well, started writing it while I was in Europe, but I wrote a novel about a guy, but that and published by Dell.
That's the Point Man, correct?
The Point Man, yeah. I went to a second printing. Dell said, we want you to do another one. So I came up with an idea. This was in like 1980, and I thought I live near the soon-to-be famous Silicon Valley, and I thought I'll do something with this hot new concept here of computers and stuff. And I knew Ted Richards, who did an underground comic called Dope and Dan. Mm-hmm. If you extend into the underground thing, Dope and Dan was a popular underground character, and Ted Richards did that. But now he was working for Atari. And I called him up, and I said, I have questions about how the computer business works for my new novel. And he said, fuck that. Come work for us. And I said, well, no, I've got a contract. I'm writing a book. And he said, yeah, but we'll give you a computer. Now we're talking the Atari 6400, right? I mean,
yeah.
Right. But that was state of the art. And I'm standing here next to Silicon Valley on the precipice of the computer era. So I gave the money back to Dell and said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to write this book, and went to work as a game designer at Atari.
Wow.
And did that for 2 years. And then Atari got sold to the guy who owned Commodore. Mm-hmm. And we knew this was happening. I mean, it wasn't a surprise that this was going on, that they belonged to Warner Brothers at that point, and the Warners was going to unload them to the Commodore guy. And I went down to the San Diego convention in 1984. 1984. And Bo Shooter from Marvel and Dick Giordano from DC, came by and said, hey, want to do comics again at any point? And I said, no. I'm doing game design for Atari now. And I went home that weekend, and Sunday night, my boss at Atari called me up, and he said, I think we're all going to get laid off on Wednesday. So the next day, I called back Shooter and Giordano, and I said, actually, I might be able to do that. but I wanted to work for both of them at that point. I didn't want to be beholden to one or the other, because whatever happened at Marvel, inevitably, if you work for one of them, you eventually get sick of it, and then you go to the other one. It's just like whatever. So I came back at that point and did Green Lantern for DC, and WandaVision, Vision Witch, West Coast Avengers, soon Silver Surfer, other stuff like that. For Marvel, I always did most of the stuff for Marvel in the 80s, but I really liked writing Green Lantern. I mean, Green Lantern was another old favorite. If I were to rank my favorite DC superheroes, it'd probably be Batman and Green Lantern.
Well, let me just tell you, Steve, I bought into the Commodore 64. I had that when I was a little kid. So
there you go.
So I just want you to know, thank you for, or maybe, I don't know if we laid you off, but I bought the Commodore 64.
Well, you didn't buy enough of them. See, that's the problem.
And the floppy disk and everything.
Yeah, and the 300 baud modem.
Yeah, load asterisk, *8, *1. It was some crazy thing to get the game on. But, okay, so now you're at Marvel and you're kind of ping-ponging over, but I have to. Now, this is another thing that gets me and Mr. Houston over here together. I never picked up an issue of the Fantastic Four prior to this, but I saw that little ad in a comic about Dr. Doom like holding a picture, and it shows the Thing, it shows the Human Torch, it shows Crystal, and it shows Miss Marvel. And now I'm young, but I'm already starting to collect by month. And like I said, I never touched the Fantastic Four, and for some reason that intrigued me. And it was the perfect jumping on point, and I collected yours every month. And I will have to say, your Fantastic, I have to say this, Steve, I'm sorry, fucking Four was so unbelievable. It was such like a soap opera with the tension with the Thing and Miss Marvel. It was some of the best stuff I've ever read. And especially at that time, you blew my mind. I have to know, what was the whole impetus of that? Like, did they say that you can break them down and do that, or what? Just give me that. I need to know, because your Fantastic Four was incredible. Oh my God. And it was so good. Art and everything. It was perfect.
Well, it was, we still had complete freedom at Marvel. We were getting toward the end of that era, but we had complete freedom. So I could do what I wanted to do. And I personally had gotten bored with the FF. I mean, it was the same four. Of course it was, but it was like the same four of them for 300 and something issues. And sometimes Luke Cage had joined, and sometimes Medusa had joined. And I mean, but by and large, it was the four of them. And I just thought, I want to shake this up. I want to like do something different with them. And what I really remembered and loved about them was, as you don't even know this, John, but I mean, in the first, maybe you do now, but I mean, in the first 5, 6, 10 issues of the Fantastic Four, Stan and Jack and Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny are all trying to figure out exactly how this whole thing like works.
Oh yeah,
and all that. And I really liked the idea that they were the normal people who got thrust into this. And they were the first ones, so they didn't really know how to do it in the beginning. And I wanted to get back to that kind of like, we're figuring it out as we go along thing. And so Reed and Sue had been saying for 10 years that they were going to have to do some, going to have to take better care of Franklin, their kid, who hadn't grown up much in 10 years, but, they should do something as parents. And I thought, yeah, well, okay, then do that. You've been talking about it. That was the thing. Things had sort of stagnated. It's like, no, you've been talking about doing this. You guys go over here, raise your kid, and then we'll get 2 new members for the FF. And then, Ben will be in charge. So now Ben's got to like figure out how to be the leader of the thing, And it was, in a sense, it was a soap opera. It certainly was, because Johnny and Crystal had a history. But, Ben had a history with Alicia, and that was about it. And Alicia wasn't about to become a member of the Fantastic Four. So then I came up with this idea, who's another woman I'm not sure. I don't think I had a particular reason for picking another woman. But who's around who could make this happen. And Ms. Marvel had a tough history to that point. She'd been,
Very
assaulted and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, well, here's a she can be rehabilitated here. I didn't think in the beginning about people turning into new things and stuff like that. But I mean, here's a character that would be interesting to, get together with this kind of family-oriented group, and she's learning to trust again, and all these different things you could do with her. And then we just ran with it, and the way I do.
But Steve, the dynamic between, like, I never cared. I did a little bit Bruce Banner and Betty and that kind of stuff, but that was the first issue. Month by month, I was into the whole drama of, like, she was afraid of the Thing, but she didn't quite think of him as a man, so she wasn't as afraid of him. And so, and that was such turmoil in the Thing. That's why, and it kind of hurt the Thing that, like, how she trusted, because she was assaulted. But that scene when the ship is shaking and they're crashing, and remember that they're in the air and the Thing's thinking, this is my time to, and he kisses her while they're, look, I'm
yeah, well,
you don't understand. As a little kid, I was like, he's gonna go for it. He's gonna go for it, and he did. Steve, Mr. Englehart, I'm crying right now because you captivated me, and I know it's funny because you and Roy and all you guys, when we talk to you, it's like, oh yeah, I just wrote it that way.
Yeah.
But to somebody like me, Houston and Niall, like, when we read that stuff, it's on this side of the fence. It was so impactful, like, changed my life, and it was better than any. I had an ex-girlfriend. I have to just tell you this really quick. I had an ex-girlfriend. They always watched General Hospital and all that when I was in high school. They were all the girls. They always got together. They loved Robert Wagner and all that crap. But I'm watching it one day with all these girls. All these girls are around me, and I'm like, now this is a few years prior. I'm not even collecting comics anymore, and I'm like, this is like Steve Englehart's Fantastic Four. And they all look at me like, what the hell is he talking about? But that's how it was. It was unbelievable. Did you watch soap operas or anything?
I did. I'm interested in stories, so I watched everything. Within the time limit of 24 hours a day. But I read all those comics. I watched a lot of TV. All this good stuff. And I don't think. I almost want to say this is original with me, but I don't think it is. I think I must have heard it somewhere. But somebody said, comics are just boys' soap operas. So I'd heard that very early on, and I thought, so I could lean into that a little bit. I could lean into the soap opera thing. Evidently from sales and so forth, it didn't scare readers away. People like characters. People like people. So they like characters doing characteristic things. If it had become, Millie the model plus the Thing or something, that would have been something else. But again, the whole thing with Crystal and Johnny, that had a solid backstory, and they had their thing going on. And so
good.
It's like, see what you can do.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say really quick, you wrote the Thing so likable. Like I liked him. It was just, I know it was the essence of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee stuff, but like, I don't know, I just cared for him and him putting it together. Okay, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
My experience with your era is a little bit different. Because of course I wasn't in the land where everyone has everything. Okay, I didn't have access to all of these issues, and I was slowly but surely putting my Fantastic Four run together in the early 1990s, and I began to pick up a couple of your issues. I began to pick up a couple, And I remember being flushed with when the thing changes to the big thing and his face is on the cover. And I was like, what in the hell is going on? And I was like, I am canceling all my other back issue purchases. This run, I'm going to go and find and I was driving around town. I was going everywhere. I'd walk in there. People were trying to sell me all sorts of stuff. Do you want to buy some X-Men and Spider-Man? I want Fantastic Four. I want issue 304. And I put these issues together, and it just began to grow and grow. And at that time, of course, I was beginning to know a little bit about Marvel's history. I was reading back issues, of course, where, you know, Johnny had been with Crystal back in the old days. And again, John is right here. You write the thing. And when he brings Crystal on the team and he has that little smile on his face, he knows he's going to mess with Johnny because Johnny messed with him. Johnny did him bad. Okay, I don't care what anyone says. This is before, Elijah the Laser Fist. It's before that. And so there's that little scene where they're down into the Mole Man's era, and there's just one little panel where Johnny's looking and you can see Crystal's ass, and he's like, oh. And then I was reading this and I was like, that's how things work. I said, that's
yes.
Yeah. Now then, up until that point, had been this bruiser, he had his cigar, he was going to go on. Now he was being manipulative and very clever. Yeah. And I was like, I love this Ben. This is the Ben that I can really get into. Now the thing is, Steve, you're not alone because, by the way, the first volume, is available. The second volume is available.
Gotta get them, Neil. Now, gotta get them.
In this month's previews, they are going to be producing the last of your work in this epic format. So all of your Fantastic Four run is going to be available in these beautiful color trades. Okay. Which makes it a lot easier for me because when someone says to me, I collect Fantastic Four and, I'm probably going to stop at John Byrne. I'm like, come here. Come over here. They're like, what? And I said, you are not stopping with John Byrne.
No.
You are going all the way up. And they're like, well, what happens? I was like, what happens? Again, we're getting a little bit carried away here, but I want to drop back into the context of what's going on. You had done the West Coast Avengers. And you had written the two hardest characters in Marvel ever to write. Okay, you wrote Wonder Man and Tigra. You managed to get that done, and then you get the Vision and Scarlet Witch series, which of course has gone on to have huge effects in the Marvel universe. But you got given basically the Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four at the same time, so you had this massive chunk of cosmic universe to yourself. Okay. And of course, the Silver Surfer. The fact that we didn't mention the Silver Surfer, we should be slapped right now for not mentioning it because up until that point, the Silver Surfer had only had 18 issues and then a couple of little guest appearances, and then suddenly we were dropped in the middle of this huge story with all these characters. The Surfer was off of Earth. It was massive, and I remember thinking to myself, "There's only one guy. Maybe Roger Stern could have done it. But I was thinking, Steve Englehart coming back at this time, it's perfect timing. You got to play with Stan's toy that he didn't allow anyone else to play with for all those years. You got him off Earth. You created these massive, talk about Kree Skrull War epics. Like Kree Skrull War filled with steroids. So, again, when you sat down there and you were like, okay, I'm going to plot out the Silver Surfer and I've got Stan Lee stuff to look up and what am I going to do? When you sat there at the house or you're writing on maybe a word processor or something like that, what were you thinking in your mind? Because you're going to take on the Silver Surfer.
Well, it was in a sense the same thing as the FF in that I was bored with the Surfer to that point. When Kirby and Lee, probably in that order, decided to have the Surfer trapped on Earth, it was poignant You know, it was, oh, this space riding guy, he's trapped on Earth. And then they kept doing stories that ended with, oh my God, I'm trapped on Earth and I'm so sad. and it was the same thing. And it was for like 10 years, you know. I mean, as you say, there weren't an infinite number of stories done, but every story was about him being trapped on Earth. So again, Shooter called me up and he said, I want you to write the Surfer. And I said, well, I thought that was Stan's thing, that nobody but Stan got to write the Surfer. And Shooter said, yeah, but I'm the editor now, and I want to make some money off this character. And so, you know, I want you to write this guy. And I said, well, okay. Have you talked to Stan? Yeah, Stan, you know. Okay, fine. So the next thing I said was, I want to get him off Earth. And they said, no, can't do that. You know, I don't know the rationale why, but they said, no, it's got to be the familiar guy. And I said, well, fine, you know. So I wrote a first issue with him trapped on Earth, hanging out with Mantis, starting to build that relationship. And then after the first issue, I think I plotted the second, and pretty sure I plotted the second and maybe even the third. All of a sudden, Shooter called up and he said, okay, you can get him off Earth. And I don't know whether that was something Stan had, you know, said something about. I don't know. But anyway, I just out of the blue, okay, now you can do what you want to do. So we took that first issue, and it later showed up in Marvel Fanfare or something, you know, where they had leftover stuff. But the series itself was able to begin with him getting off Earth, and so then that opened up space. You know, here's this guy. He's got all this room now to mess around with, and all the people, everybody, as you said, everybody who's a space person in the Marvel Universe was now available. Usually, you know, the characters are linked to the books that they have appeared in and all this kind of stuff, but it was not, nobody, you know, the in-betweener, the, you know, Galactus even, I mean, they were all available if they were space people. And so I was able to start building all these stories with these characters that hadn't been used in a long time, and finding things to do with them. So, I mean, each book is like, what can I do to make this interesting? Sometimes I like books when I think them over. It's not always that I don't like them, but it's like, okay, here where we are. What can I do to make it work? And then, you know, how can I take it someplace new too at the same time, right? Someplace that hasn't been done before. I mean, that's my you know, general approach to this stuff.
Before I give it to Niall, I want to just say, when I was collecting your Fantastic Four, my brother was collecting the Silver Surfer, and that was his favorite superhero. And he was telling me the Silver Surfer is good now, and I'm like, well, the Fantastic Four is even better, and we're fighting over it. We didn't even realize they were both you. Okay, Niall, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction here because I'm a little, my generational reading's a bit different. But so the late 80s now comes into play, and you've got a new publisher, you know, on the block, which is Malibu. Right. Now, what brought you
early 90s, but okay.
Early 90s. What brought you over to Malibu? I know, you know, one of my first books I read from you was Strangers.
Yeah. Well, that was another San Diego special. I was down there and got approached by probably Chris Ulm, you know, people from Malibu saying, we're putting together this thing, and we want you to help create the universe and be, you know, and write a couple of our books. And I liked it. I mean, I liked because Gerber was involved in that too. We talked about Gerber at the beginning of all of this.
Yep.
And Gerber and I, we were like lobsters, though, the famous lobsters in the pot. I mean, Malibu says, hey, you guys can have complete creative freedom. And Gerber and I were sitting by the pool because Malibu took us all to Scottsdale to a resort for 4 days where we could brainstorm, all of us. I mean, it was like a really nice operation. And Gerber and I were sitting by the pool one afternoon, and we just said, we sort of forgot that you could do this. You know, that you could have complete freedom to you know, to come up with your own stuff. You know, we liked Malibu quite a bit. And they had, you know, they had been they had published the Image books before Image became itself, right? So Malibu had raked in a lot of money, obviously being the publisher for the Image books. And they wanted to take it and they wanted to create sort of Image universe, except not based on artists this time, based on writers this time. So, you know, they had Gerber, they had Jerry Jones, they had Mike Barr. I'm blanking here on some of this, but so it was a writer-driven universe, and obviously us writers like that part. And we, I mean, this whole thing in Scottsdale, each of us would say, "Here's a character that I want to do," and I think he works like this. And then everybody else could jump in and go, "Well, what if he did this? And how about if he did this?" And you know. And so it was really a group effort to build all of these Malibu characters, although the guys who wrote the books were the guys who created those characters in those books. And we were all allowed to do it, you know, to have our own voices. Jim Hudnall, that's who I'm forgetting. We were able to do it the way we thought it should be done. And they had a lot of money. But then Marvel went bankrupt and sort of took the whole industry down with them. And Malibu was the last to hit bottom. They had enough money to outlast, you know, other people who ran out of money during this time. But eventually they did, and then they got bought, and then life went on from there. But it was a real treat, those 2 years, really, when we were able to, you know, just create the universe and run it. And that's about all I can say about the Malibu stuff. I mean,
Go ahead, Steve.
So, of course, I do remember all that stuff there, but I wanted to go back a little bit to the Fantastic Four, because once again, we are going to get to a point where there is some political pressure. There's some reason that the job, you know, it gets, you know, maybe not fun for you, which is, for me, after reading the rejuvenation and the explanation about the Beyonder, which you had been asked to do, and this one of the biggest stories, the Secret Wars 3, one of the biggest stories ever to unfold in Marvel. It's just genius. And by the way, I really want to give credit to the artist at the time, Keith Pollard, who was drawing outside of himself. It was beautiful art, and it was a link to Marvel's past. It was clear storytelling, this huge scope. And for me, I got the feeling that you were being, again, you'd gone back to that period where you'd done those big swaths of history went over in the Avengers, and suddenly here you were in the Fantastic Four. I mean, you went from stuff that was in, you know, Morbius, you know, Adventure into Fear, and then the Caretakers, and then it was massive. And for someone like me that at that time was a sponge, I always loved to feel that I'm not in someone else's realm. And I was like, this Steve Englehart guy, he must have like the leader's head. I just imagine now, like
MODOK. It's MODOK.
Access,
MODOK,
you know, all of this.
MODOK.
Yes. So, again, great stuff after great stuff after great stuff. And then we get to that little period where you're obviously under some sort of stress and you change your name to John Harkness.
Right.
Now, I know it might be sort of unpleasant, but I think, you know, I'd love to get into the reasons. What happened? What sort of pressure were you getting that would turn you away from the book that you were having so much fun with?
It was editorial. A new shooter eventually got replaced by Tom DeFalco. And I've talked about this a little bit with Tom over the years. It wasn't Tom's decision, but Tom was sent out to say that the guys in charge had decided that they wanted to really rein in all this creativity. That they were now looking much more at being able to sell lunchboxes with Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny on them. And therefore they needed Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny to be in the comic. And you know, there was that. And I was also told, we want the Surfer to go back to doing one-issue stories where he flies away at the end feeling bad about things. And I said, both of those ideas are the things that kind of like didn't work, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, but it'll be good for merchandising. And that was, you know, to me, that was the end of the Marvel age, you know? That was, you know, that was the era of the House of Ideas, and all that stuff sort of came to an end. And you know, I then soon thereafter left, and so I wasn't around. But I mean, in the years, just a few years after that, they went bankrupt and took the whole industry down with them because of this approach. But you know, so they said, you have to do this. You have to bring Reed and Sue back, and you have to make the Surfer one-issue stories, you know. And I did that. I think I did one issue, maybe 2 issues under that. But I was bitching about it. I was not going quietly about this. And so then they came and they said, well, look, you know, you don't want to be here. We don't want to have to go through this. How about if you take the next 6 months, you can do whatever you want to do, but then in 6 months you're out of here.
Oh.
So with the Surfer, I built this huge Kree Skrull thing. I mean, I made it as big and as complex and as crazy as possible. With the FF, I had all these plots that I was going to run through. I'd set up things that were going to play out, and so I was much more cynical there. I mean, I really thought, you know, fuck these guys. And I'm a professional. I got to turn something in, right? But I mean, basically, in the FF, I did a thing where the real FF gets frozen in cabinets somewhere, and so there's this fake FF that then kind of blows through each of my plots issue after issue, rather than taking 3 or 4 issues to like explore Ultron or do whatever. It's like, no, boom, they go right through each one of them because I had all these plots and I only had 6 months. So the FF is much more of a, this is all fake, you know, this is all just stuff. With the Surfer, I really wanted to like do something cosmic, because there wasn't, you know, it wasn't like he was going to change after that. As it turned out, they hired Starlin, and Starlin was able to do his Thanos stuff with it, you know. But the Surfer, I felt like I could really sign off big time. With the FF, it was just like, and so I changed my name to John Harkness, which was a pseudonym that I had used over the years whenever I felt like the stuff wasn't as good as it ought to be, and I didn't really feel like I should have my name on it, you know. And then as things got worse, then I went over to SFX Englehart, which SFX means sound effects. You know, it was just, I'm just writing words here to kind of fill out this thing. It was as in your face as I could make it, you know. But they stood it for the 6 months, and then I was out of there, you know.
But Steve, what you're saying there is very interesting, because that's an insider look exactly when the House of Ideas was just starting to crumble and stuff. Because usually I kind of think it was kind of doing it a little bit before that, but that's a great inside view of like how the writers, especially from your time, were handling all that change and about the marketability, because that's when the MCU and like it all started becoming a lot more plastic. And I remember even myself, I was starting to tune out. Like I was still collecting. Go ahead.
Well, another thing that was said to me in that first meeting was, we don't really want to pay stars to do these books because Spider-Man will always sell. So we don't need stars doing Spider-Man or the FF or any of that kind of stuff. That was their attitude, you know. That's what they had come to.
And that,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying that kind of never ended after that. You know, I mean, there's been some highs and lows of comics since that, but like never again at that, the when you guys started, like that fun, that just creative atmosphere. Now, some there were hard parts and, you know, editorial with some things here and there, but for the most part, you guys wrote gold. And like all the Marvel universe, all that stuff is basically the foundation of everything you see today. And they're taking bits and pieces of that. And like, once again, you guys made you're part of that, the greatest movie franchise in the history of the world, because they're taking bits and pieces of all that stuff you guys did, and then they put the new stuff that they on top of that, but they need the foundation of what you guys did. You, Roy, I mean, that's incredible, and it's just good to see, like I said, the inside of it, how from your perspective how it was happening.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, I'm sure you could tell me what Roy thinks about this, but I mean, when I went to the premiere of Shang-Chi, when the movie was over, I was standing in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard on the red carpet with everybody milling around, you know, leaving the theater, whatever. And a guy said to me, "How does it feel to know that this is all because of you?" And I had never really looked at that way before, right? But all of a sudden, I'm looking at Hollywood Boulevard and the lights and the signs and the theaters and the, you know, the 5 minutes of credits of all the guys who worked on the movie and all this kind of stuff. Because Jim Starlin and I thought we might like to do a character called Shang-Chi. I still can't like beat my chest about it. You know, it's like that's just the way it is. But it is interesting. You know, it is interesting to think. Yeah, we just sort of thought these things up, and then now it's a $1 zillion industry.
Oh, like we do it to Roy. I mean, like to pull it out of you. I know you guys are modest and stuff, but like seriously, you changed the world, and that's something that's why we'll celebrate it for you. You're not going to say it, but we will. Go ahead, Steve. I'm going to say it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, and especially here we are in, you know, 2022, and we've seen a lot of work by a lot of different people, and we've been able to judge these people by what's gone on before. Now, me and John are very harsh. You know, most times we will tear the new people to shreds because they will get the basics wrong. And when I'm reading someone that I think that I know more than, that I could do better than, I don't respect that person.
Yeah.
I had to even think that I could know more than where Steve Englehart is going with a plot line. I would immediately just have to get a stick and smack myself, because that's just not going to happen. And that's what I like to feel. I like to have that feeling of awe that the people who were writing this product were so far advanced in their knowledge and their way they write and their skill that all I could do is buy that book and follow along. Go, how? Wow, that story, that was 12 years ago. And oh my word, yes, that's right. Again,
I was doing this, Roy was doing it. It's still, I mean, when I got there, it was only 10 years into the Marvel Universe. So when I wrote the Avengers, I was writing the exact same characters that Stan had written and Roy had written, you know, I mean, and that 10 years was all, Daredevil had met the Fantastic Four. I mean, all these things had been established, and I really liked that. I loved continuity because it made the world real. But I totally get it that, you know, after about 1990, now it was 30 years into it, and it became impossible really to do continuity that made any sense. I mean, you could refer people to Fantastic Four #7, but not many people were going to be able to find it or remembered it fondly or any of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, continuity, I get it that it had to die over time. But in my time, it was part and parcel of the whole thing. And I really liked making that world real, finding the connections that people would go, oh, yeah, that did happen. So then,
all of you did it. When Gerber pieced things together, Roy pieced things together, like I know this is going to sound weird, but that's what made the Marvel Zombie. When you picked up an issue of Marvel, you were like home. Like
Yeah.
it was being at home because it felt like, and that's what DC could never do. I never could pick up an issue of DC and it didn't feel like home. It just felt like, I don't know where I am. Okay, this happens here, doesn't happen there. When you picked up an issue of the Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, you could just get into that one issue and you felt like you knew everything. It just felt like home. And that's why there's people like me and Steve that were kind of rewired as these freaks for this, but that stuff is what people today don't understand. It was such a familiarity. Like you like I said, you read your Fantastic Four and you know what was going on everywhere, and the effects were felt in all the other issues. And it just was so wonderful how Stan made that all that connection, and you guys just expanded on it. And listen, Steve, there's very few of you that ever did it as good as you, Roy, Gerber. Like you guys were like so meticulous with that stuff. That even better than Stan, because Stan would forget things and you guys did it, and you guys had more to work with. It was just incredible, and I'm going to commend you.
Well, that's where the fans came in, though, John. Now like Steve has been a comic book reader since the 1950s. I mean, now the fans were entering the career. So it wasn't just like Stan and Kirby who were building these things and creating them. Now the kids that were reading them and whatnot were now coming in, or the young adults that are reading it are now coming in writing these books too. So it brings an extra depth to the stories, which I hate to say today, they don't. The books that you were writing, Steve, it retained with you, right? Like you were part of that adventure, that escapism. And today we don't get the same thing.
Yeah, it was like a warm blanket. I swear to God, it was, and it was
fun.
Roy.
It's fun.
Yeah, but it was Roy like that broke the wall, and then all these guys followed. It was just it was wonderful.
But there's also one thing that we're and I want to bring it up is that Steve also came back to Marvel in like 2000 and wrote. I remember you wrote Hellcat, the Fantastic Four, Big Town, and Avengers Celestial Quest. Yeah, so suddenly, here you are. It's 2000, 2001. And you are plopped right in the center of this universe again, especially with the Avengers Celestial Quest. How was that experience? Was there any intimidation there? Or did you just say, I'm going to strive forward and just see what I can do?
I wouldn't say intimidation. I was never intimidated by writing stories, but Marvel was completely different in the early 2000s. They had been bankrupt. They had come back. So I didn't know any of the editors. I didn't know the structure of the place or anything. And I remember one interesting facet there was when I was working for Brevoort, and the first thing he gave me, I guess, was the Hellcat thing, which I really liked, by the way. Norm Brayfogle art. I thought that was a nice little series to do. But he said, you wrote Patsy Walker, you brought Patsy Walker into the Marvel Universe, so this would be something, you could do here. And I said, well, the problem is I haven't, I used to know all of the history of everything, but I haven't been around here for 10 years, so I don't know what's going on. And Brevoort said, well, it's no longer the writer's responsibility to know that. It's the editor's responsibility to know that. So I will tell you what it is you need to know. As far as Patsy Walker goes, she committed suicide and went to hell.
Yes, thank you, Jan DeMatteis.
So like, okay, well, my job is to pick up the continuity as it exists, and and read up on stuff I don't know. There was something in that book, I don't remember what it was, but there was something that was a mistake, and people wrote in and said, oh, you didn't do this thing that you should have done or whatever. And that's because Brevoort didn't tell me about it, but it's like not being able to encompass the entire thing when I'm writing this was difficult. And you know, I mean, so but I like the way that came out. The Hellcat or the Mantis thing, Celestial Quest. I was sort of the cleanup guy. It was what, you know, he wanted, Brevoort wanted to bring Patsy Walker back to life. And he said, you know, everybody's been writing Mantis stories and she's really gotten off track. So you can put her back on track here, you know. So a lot of that impetus for those books that I did in that little era was to sort of fix things that, you know, and I'm not really sure how they, you know, I don't know how they got to where they were, but they said, here's where they are, and do something with this, you know. So I did that, and then I did create Big Town, which I really sort of liked as a real alternative universe sort of thing. It was a weird concept, an alternate. I mean, briefly, the concept was, if Tony Stark and Reed Richards have been inventing all this cool shit for years, parts of it would have filtered into the society. You would have cool things in your house that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so I built this alternate universe where that was happening and so forth, you know, but it was kind of a brief period. I wasn't real comfortable just sort of coming in and because basically it was kind of saying, the people who were writing Mantis, for example, before you fucked up, so now we'd like you to fix it. Well, I didn't really like being in the position of the guy saying, yeah, I'm fixing all of your guys' mistakes, you know. You know, I didn't stick around all that long in that
yeah,
in that era.
I remember that though, because I remember the Celestial Quest, because I know Kurt Busiek was writing the Avengers at that time. Like they restarted to the 3rd volume, and basically what they were doing is they were getting back to basics. If you read those stories, Busiek, you can just you read Roy Thomas, you read Steve Englehart. That's all it is. It's all rehashed and redone again.
Well,
so
his favorite Avengers writer was Steve Englehart.
Well, yeah, you could tell. Even back then, I could tell. But they threw George Perez's art on top of that to make it look pretty. But then when you did that, that's why in my head I was like, oh, Marvel's trying to go back to basics. Here's Steve Englehart again, and now he's doing this little thing on the side here that's kind of fixing stuff up. You know, like I said, I saw what they were trying to do. They were trying to, but it didn't last, because the thing is with the Marvel stuff, you get into it, they do it for a certain amount, then they just go. At that time too, it was just like, and then you go here, there, or everywhere else, and it didn't have the same thing. So it doesn't surprise me that you were there and then you were gone. You know, like it just never felt the same.
John, we were just about to move, and I'm sure Steve is fully aware. At that time, we had all those new hot guys coming in doing the Marvel Nights. And apparently they were geniuses. They knew the stories, they knew the characters better than anyone had ever written them before. And so anyone of a certain age was suddenly, oh, well, we don't need you anymore because we've got such and such and such and such and such. So people like me and you, John, when we would read these people, we would say, well, they've got the characterization wrong. But the artist was drawing a nice, pretty picture. Okay. And I think that's what happened. And a lot of editors came in, began to say, okay, I'm not even going to bother calling. And when I was in New York, I had a nice long conversation with Chris Claremont. And I said, Chris, you are very, very fortunate right now that you keep getting projects given to you. You know, he's just coming out with another X-Men series. He's got another Excalibur series coming out. And I said, you know, the writers of your ilk, and maybe some who are a little bit older than you, they're blocked out. They can't get in. And we have to suffer these dullards that we have writing today.
Dullards. Oh.
And, you know, And Chris was like, yes. He goes, I'm very lucky. I've still got like 1 or 2 editors in both companies that they know me and they will call me. And he kept saying to me, and he goes, I want to prove to this new generation that I can write and that they and make sales. He goes, this is my chance. He goes, I want to make sales. I'm going to prove to these guys that yes, I'm in my late 60s, but I can write and give them and make them money. And he goes, I'm determined. And I saw a fire in his eyes, and I was like, wow, Chris, you're really goes. I'm determined. I just wish that an opportunity like that would come along to you, Steve, because your little finger contains more imagination and talent than I think the last 100 people that have been hired at Marvel.
200.
I really do believe, because of the structure of your mind and the way that you know the characters. So yes, there would be continuity that you would have to brush up on and the editor would have to say. But you know how Hawkeye's arrows fire. You know how Vision's power works. You know how certain aliens and what planets they come from. You know that. Where the new guys, they don't know. They make mistakes. They have characters like Black Bolt, more powerful than the Celestials. Again, I just wanted to share that with you and let you know that there's people out there that adore your work and would love to see you working. And it's just that, we think it's a crime that you're not getting the opportunity. But with where you are now in life, would that be something that you're open to, or are you past that now? Are you on to other things?
No, I am on to other things, but I totally understand what Chris is talking about. My thing for the last 2 years, I have said to myself, I could fix the DC movie universe. I could go down there and I could run that. Now they've got James Gunn, who's going to do a fabulous job. I love James Gunn stuff. I never came close to getting that job, but I thought, they don't know how to do stuff at DC. I already came over once and redid the Justice League for them. I could do this, but so I mean, I like challenges, and fixing the DC universe would certainly be a challenge. That kind of thing. But what I am doing, as I probably said last time, I'm sort of writing other things. I'm trying to do stories, adventure stories, almost superheroic stories, but maybe not with a superhero, and just exploring areas that I couldn't explore when I was doing, working within somebody's universe, whatever. Hopefully some of them might appear in print at some point, but I'm fortunate enough. I'm doing the writing for the challenge, for the fun of writing it, and not. I would like it to appear, but it's not like it has to for me to be happy. So, no, if I've said this before, but everybody's a product of their environment, and my environment was complete creative freedom. Mm-hmm. So when they were talking to me about doing the Ultraverse as part of the Marvel universe, they wanted me to give them a plot for the first issue, and then a précis of the next 11 plots. And I don't work like that. If I got to issue 12 of something and all I was doing was checking off the boxes on things that I had spent 5 minutes thinking about a year before, that wouldn't do me any good. So it's like, if somebody wanted to hire me, they would basically have to say, okay, we saw it work once, so we're willing to let you just run with it and see what you can come up with, Okay. And I don't really think that that's a prevalent attitude in comics these days. There is too much.
I think
it's all run by editors, and they all want to have 12 issues ahead, so they know how to merchandise it and how to do all those things. which I can't say they're all bullshit reasons, but it's, for me personally, you just have to say, here, take this book and run with it. And then, and I'm sure Chris is doing that, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, if you crash and burn, then you crash and burn, and you prove the people right who didn't think you could do it. But if they don't let you do it, and I'm not, that sounds like I'm feeling locked out, which is not the case. But I mean, if you don't get a chance to do it, nobody knows whether you can do it.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, if Chris is selling books these days, that ought to be the bottom line. It shouldn't matter at all. I mean, I'm older than he is, right? I mean, but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter how. And Roy's older than I am. That shouldn't matter. I mean, if you're writing an interesting story, you're writing an interesting story, and that should be the bottom line. But I do think that they've gotten away from that.
But Steve, Chris managed to get what he wanted, because when he said he wanted to do the Excalibur, he basically said, "My Excalibur."
Yeah.
All that other stuff, no. I'm going to give you my Excalibur, and I'm going to show you I can make sales. So again, it just goes to show that maybe all the doors haven't been closed, and maybe there's some people out there that are maybe trying to think outside the box, maybe reach into the past and say, hey, what about this legend? The guy that wrote stuff 2020, do you think he can come back and play? And if they're willing to be like, they didn't like shout at him and say, you're going to write the brand new stuff with all these 12-year-old kids. Because by the way, he was telling me stuff that I can't say here because otherwise we'd be canceled. Generally speaking, again, for me, the first thing I thought was like, oh my God, can you imagine if they called up people like Roger Stern and called up people like Steve Englehart and they said, hey, we have a project. Okay. Remember this story there that wasn't quite finished? What can you do with it? And letting you run wild. And I would love to see what those stories would do in today's genre with people reading it, to see that complexity, to see that use of continuity from that era. I just want to see it tested. And it would be an interesting test. But it reminds me of something Chris said to me back there in the early 2000s. That's when comics were at that point like $3.99 or something like that. And I said, Chris, I would gladly have my stuff here printed on newsprint and sell it for $1. And he said it would be perceived as down market and nobody would buy it. People expect to pay $3.99 for the glossy paper and stuff now. So it's kind of the deal. I mean, if you threw the best 1970s, 80s comic book out there, it would be very different from what people are experiencing. And it could be that they would, they'd go, geez, this is taking me 15 minutes to read. What am I supposed to do here,
So, Steve, it would
be interesting.
Yeah, it would be good. If you took that 1970 comic, you put it today, it would be a good comic. Okay, I know we kept you for a long time. Niall, you got any last words for Mr. Englehart?
Yeah, I actually kind of answered a question I was going to have, just kind of talking about the new age of comics and kind of how the market is. So I just want to thank you for coming on and hanging out and chatting with us. It's been an extreme honor.
Easy to do.
Yeah. Mr. Houston?
Again, Steve, I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to be speaking with you and to be getting this firsthand information from you, which I think is invaluable. And, after all of the stuff I've done in my life, right now, what we're doing here on this little podcast and speaking to legends like you is like the highlight of my life right now. And I really want to say I really appreciate everything you've done. And there's a lot more people out there that really love your work and appreciate you at the same level.
Well, if you find one who works for Marvel, let me know.
And the other thing,
self-publish, crowdfunding.
I've thought about it. That might happen too. You know, yeah.
This is what I think. For you guys, I would love for you to like be a consultant. If anything, like a consultant on a movie set or something, like somebody like they could turn to see if something is going right. That's the knowledge I think that you guys would bring to like the MCU, because they're taking bits and pieces of your crap anyways. It's like, and they're like, oh yeah, that's my thing, and there it is. It's like, why wouldn't you have one of those guys on the set? The truth is, as we both know, Marvel and DC, it's a totally different world today. It's a totally different business. It's a totally different environment. It wasn't you. I'll tell you, Steve, as you know, when you were let to go on your own and just let yourself run wild, you and Steve Gerber, David Anthony Kraft, when you guys got the reins to do what you guys had to do, just write it. That's when the best stuff came, you know, like that's when, because you had that, once again, when Shooter said, yeah, just write it the way you want to. It just, you got the best out of it. And that is something that will not happen today. And as you know, or I don't know if you do know, a lot of those writers are given a spreadsheet. Okay, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to, write it. And it's basically written, and it's like somebody like you, somebody like Steve Gerber, oh my God, he'd come with the machine gun like destroy a duck. He'd be taking everybody out. Can you imagine Gerber? Somebody like Roy, you guys are not built like that. And it's funny to me that they'll always try to check your guys' work and like, oh yeah, but it's this and it's that, it's old school, or yeah, it's kind of old fashioned. But everything is built on that shit, and that's what they don't understand. Everything is built on that.
Well, and I would also
go ahead.
I would also say, speaking for myself, and I would imagine it applies to Chris and to Roy and the others too. But I mean, I personally don't feel like I am stuck in the 70s. I mean, I think the stuff that I'm writing now, I'm enjoying it as a story, but the characters, I don't think you would write them off as old-fashioned or out of touch or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, those guys are old and therefore blah, blah, blah. But once again, it's like, see what we do if it comes to that. Again, I'm actually not pitching for jobs here. It's like,
no, I know.
But I mean, it's
I love it.
I would doubt that Chris writes exactly the way he did 50 years ago, 40 years ago, but you don't know unless you do it. So.
Right. But for me, Steve, really quickly before I end this, it's like, I think if you guys were to write it, you guys would show them how these things are supposed to be. And that's something how they're not even written today. They're not even written how they're supposed to be, because you got Captain America saying things that he would never, like Jack Kirby is punching his way out of the graveyard saying like, what, it's just, I'm just saying, like, I don't think that realism or just the way their characters are, they're not even there anymore. Now they're just tokens again. And that's like, really quick, like you said, when you started writing the Justice League, they were all kind of avatars. I think that's basically what they are today. Sure, they got a little bit of sass and all that, but they're not the same people we grew up with. And unfortunately, that's a sad thing. But they advertise them that way. That's the thing that drives me crazy. They advertise them that way. You'll always see the toys and all that stuff. It's all your guys' stuff. But then when you read the comic books, it's nothing like it. And that's why those comics don't sell anything. All right, sorry to be on my soapbox, but that's what I think.
You got a flame building up in me right now, John.
Before we go, something just came across my mind, Steve. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of it. Have you read Invincible?
Long time ago.
Okay, because what we're talking about is a creator that left Marvel because he was being overly controlled. Right. And he gets to play, he created his whole own universe. And I must admit, when it comes to being at the top and the cutting edge of what a superhero book is right now, Invincible is basically the book that everyone looks to these days as, what a modern comic should be. Now, of course, it's a little bit more, it's a way more violent than anything that we can see. But he is a Marvel maniac, and he just transferred all that Marvel maniac into his own little universe and let his imagination run wild. And he's the one that's having all this success, and his stories and his characters. He has the successful cartoon, and he got thrown. He left Marvel because he was being controlled. So
created The Walking Dead.
Yeah, that's what makes me lead to the position that if you were unchained and you were allowed to play, I really do think, and I do, that people will go, hey, have you seen this new guy, this Steve Englehart? He's pretty good.
This young guy. Who's this Steve Englehart? This young guy.
Yeah.
So, Steve, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. We're going to get you back on again, you know that, and we're gonna have some fun. But it's always an honor to have you guys and always to spread your message out there. We love you, and we're always going to do it. So thank you very much. And Mr. Houston, get us out of here.
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.